This relationship between man and woman, again we emphasize, is supposed to be complementary, not competitive. When a man tries to become a woman and a woman tries to become a man, then you unsettle the natural balance which Allah Ta'ala has created. So if men have been abusive towards women, which historically has been the case, we can't overgeneralize, but at the same time we can't trivialize it. There has been a lot of abuse of women, then that abuse has to be dealt with. And it has to be brought back to a point of moderation and balance, not taken to the other extreme, where men are now demonized and men are now emasculated to the point where it's like, okay, yesterday you were the bully and I was the bullied. Today I will become the bully and you become the bullied. Because that is just moving from one extreme to another, substituting one problem with another. There are those who, for example, would say, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did household chores, so my husband must do household chores. Yes, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did household chores, but was it his primary responsibility? Now you can't look at that one thing in isolation, that the Ummahatul Mu'mineen said that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did household chores. What about Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's daughter Fatima radiallahu anha coming and saying, Ya Rasulullah, I am so burdened with the household chores that I need a servant to assist me. And he said, I don't have a servant to give you, so read the tasbih, which is known as tasbih Fatima. He didn't say, no, tell your husband to do half. So there's a primary responsibility and there's a secondary responsibility. You've got to understand that. Sometimes women will say, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam married Khadija radiallahu anha and she was a businesswoman. Absolutely correct. That's a historical fact. Was Aisha radiallahu anha a businesswoman? Was Salama radiallahu anha a businesswoman? What happened afterwards? Right? What about, not going too much into academics, certain things happen before certain regulations came. And certain things happen after certain regulations came. So to use the example of Khadija radiallahu anha to suggest that a woman's primary responsibility is to do business, that would be incorrect. Of course it's permissible for a woman to do business within the parameters of the Sharia. But ultimately, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ, whose primary responsibility is it to earn the livelihood for the family? It's the husband's. If you look at the nature of a woman, right, even a modern woman, what does she want? She wants a strong man. She doesn't want a meek, weak man. There's a difference between a strong man, al-mu'min al-qawi, and an abusive man. So again, I'm reiterating because, people sometimes just go on a tangent. Oh, but men are abusing their wives and they sexually exploiting their wives and they battering their wives. Of course, that stands condemned. It goes without saying. We're not talking about that. We're talking about overcorrecting. And where society now wants to push equality to the point of insulting a woman. Because the more a woman becomes like a man, the more you acknowledge her. And the less that she becomes like her own unique creation, which she is, which Allah Ta'ala has created her, the more you see her as backward and you see her as conservative and you see her as under the clutches of the men. Men are being encouraged, be it via the media or movies or what is now considered to be woke or considered to be fashionable, that no, you must become weak and meek. You must become, everything has to be kind of half-half, equal rather than equitable. You're actually upsetting the balance. In the quest for gender equality, you're actually achieving gender absurdity. It's not good for women, it's not good for the men, and it's not good for children. And we're starting to see the effects of it. You're starting to see men, for example, who are taking this grooming to an extreme level. So of course, we know that Allah says in the Quran, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, that women have similar rights over men like men have rights over them. And Abdullah ibn Abbas used to say that I, will keep myself neat and tidy so that like I want my wife to be, attractive and appealing to me. But beauty is more appreciated in a woman. That is a biological fact. Even the advertising industry acknowledges that, right? They want to sell anything, they put a woman next to it. That's not a license for a man to be dirty or to be untidy. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam carried his comb, he carried his miswak, he carried his itar, he did miswak of the teeth before he entered the home. That is all important. But now men going to the point where they're wearing more jewelry than the women folk wear, where they spend more time by the barber, doing threading and shaping of eyebrows. I'm not going into the masail of it. So now that is, in my opinion, a man trying to be more woman than a woman is actually supposed to be.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In today's podcast, we are delving into a very important subject, a topic that goes often unspoken and yet felt by many men, the aspect of emasculation in a world where gender roles are constantly challenged and redefined by society and people, and in a world where many men feel the feeling of inadequacy, loss, and uncertainty about their place in society. The aspect of emasculation touches on variety of issues in life, whether it's relationships, whether it's their place in society, whether it's their place at the workplace, or even in the media space. Men are constantly questioning themselves and their role in society and how they fit in. So, to unpack this complex issue today, we have Maulana Suleiman Rawat in our podcast session to take us through some of the complexities to understand what is at hand. Maulana, Jazakallah khairan for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Habib, indeed a very important topic.
Indeed, yes, and an important one to address. Let's start off with the basics first, Maulana. Let's look at the definition. What do we mean when we say masculinity and when we say emasculation? Let's define what we are speaking about first before we get into the crux of it.
Yeah, so that's a good starting point. There are certain traits, there are certain qualities like leadership, strength, responsibility that are associated with the male primarily. And when a man starts to perceive that those qualities are diminishing, or it has been diminished when it comes to him, then it could lead to a man feeling disempowered, somewhat lacking in purpose. So, yes, when we talk about emasculation, we're not talking only about the proverbial dominating wife whose husband is a bicharo type, like we would say in society. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. It's a little bit more complex than that. It's got to do with what Allah has created to be the inherent qualities of man, and whether a man in his individual circumstance or collectively or generally in a particular community or in a particular time and age or era, there's a challenge where those traits within men are being intentionally or inadvertently targeted and diminished.
Now, we often hear people quoting the verse of the Noble Quran that الرجال قوامون على النساء, and they use this as the premise of their discussion to say that men are superior and that's how things should operate. How do we contextualize this verse and how do we bring it into our modern day setting?
So we first have to ask ourselves the question that why is there a misunderstanding around this particular verse? These days there are all different types of terminologies. So you'll hear chauvinism or chauvinist, then you hear the term patriarchy, you hear the term matriarchy, you hear the term toxic masculinity. Where does all of this fit in as far as the Islamic paradigm is concerned? And I think this is an important juncture we must emphasize. We are looking at this from an Islamic paradigm. Other ideologies may look at it differently. So the root cause of the misunderstanding of what is a man's role as enshrined in the Quran is that we don't understand what Islam wants from a man and a woman. This misunderstanding sometimes perhaps is as a result of how the media portrays that relationship these days, or a new secular kind of view on what that relationship should be. Now, without getting too technical, simply put, in Islam, the relationship between a man and a woman is meant to be complementary, not competitive. So, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has created man and woman equal, in a sense that they are both His servants. They both get equally rewarded. They can both get equally punished for any good or any bad that they do. مَنْ عَمِلَ صَالِحًا مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنْثَى فَلَنُحْيِيَنَّهُ حَيَاةً طَيِّبَةً. But in terms of role and in terms of functions, Allah has not created them identical. It's obvious from the biology of a man to the biology of a woman. There are many qualities and there are many responsibilities that overlap. A man has a responsibility and a woman has a responsibility in a particular regard. But you've got to see that as per the design of Allah, what are the qualities and the responsibilities which Allah wants to be primary for a man and secondary for a woman? And what are the qualities and responsibilities that Allah wants to be primary for a woman and secondary for a man? What has happened is that historically there has been abuse on the part of men. Men who have in various ways abused women. Men who have treated women like slaves, who have treated women like commodities, who have treated women like subhuman. Now society wants to correct that, which is a good thing because that is in alignment with the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When the Nabi of Allah came as a Nabi in Makkah, where women were commodified and they were part of inheritance and girl babies were buried alive, he corrected that. However, you must not overcorrect. There has to be a balance. This relationship between man and woman, again we emphasize, is supposed to be complementary, not competitive. When a man tries to become a woman and a woman tries to become a man, then you unsettle the natural balance which Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has created. So if men have been abusive towards women, which historically has been the case, we can't overgeneralize, but at the same time we can't trivialize it. There has been a lot of abuse of women, then that abuse has to be dealt with. And it has to be brought back to a point of moderation and balance, not taken to the other extreme, where men are now demonized and men are now emasculated to the point where it's like, okay, yesterday you were the bully and I was the bullied. Today I will become the bully and you become the bullied. Because that is just moving from one extreme to another, substituting one problem with another. Coming now directly to your question. See, there's a lot of academic discussion and there will be perhaps some difference of opinion. But let's start with the translation. Some of the more common words used is الرجال قوامون على النساء, are words like caretaker, guardian. So again, it's all about moderation and balance. On the one extreme is for man to think that this is a license to have an attitude of my way or the highway, or this is a license to abuse women, or this is a license to treat women in whichever way you want. Of course it's not. And the general principle is that you don't look at one verse of the Quran in isolation. You look at all the verses pertaining to that topic. So there are other verses. وَعَشِّرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, treat your women folk exceptionally kindly. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's command, the best of you are the best of you to your women folk, and I am the best. That said, right, in any context, a president has a rank over a vice president. The CEO has a rank over the COO. The manager has a rank over the ordinary staff member. As humans, they're equal. As citizens of the country, they're equal. In terms of their human rights, they're equal. Similarly, as Muslims, men and women are equal. It's not to say if a man performs 2 rakat salah, he automatically gets double the reward. As servants of Allah, they're equal. They have their rights, their respective rights. The rights don't need to be necessarily identical, but they're equal or equitable, right? But there is the verse of the Quran which we cannot go away from. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. That when it comes to certain aspects of the husband-wife dynamic, of the home dynamic, the man has the final say. He has that status. Like in a cabinet, the president has the final say. In a business, the boss has the final say. In a community or organization or whatever, the Amir has the final say. So we've got to find the balance. Man can't use it as an excuse to abuse or totally marginalize women and totally treat women as if they got no say. No, your wife, your mother, your sister, they are your partners in journey. But there is going to be a time where one person has got to make certain decisions, and the responsibility stops with one person. Now, this aspect of qiwama, or however you want to term it, how does it apply? Let's take a look at a few examples, right, on either extreme. There are those who, for example, would say, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did household chores, so my husband must do household chores. Yes, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did household chores, but was it his primary responsibility? Now, you can't look at that one thing in isolation, that the Ummahatul Mu'mineen said that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did household chores. What about Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's daughter Fatima radiallahu anha coming and saying, Ya Rasulullah, I am so burdened with the household chores that I need a servant to assist me. And he said, I don't have a servant to give you, so read the tasbih, which is known as tasbih Fatimi. He didn't say, no, tell your husband to do half. So there's a primary responsibility and there's a secondary responsibility. We've got to understand that. Sometimes a woman will say, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam married Khadija radiallahu anha and she was a businesswoman. Absolutely correct. That's a historical fact. Was Aisha radiallahu anha a businesswoman? Was Salama radiallahu anha a businesswoman? What happened afterwards? Right? What about, not going too much into academics, certain things happen before certain regulations came. And certain things happen after certain regulations came. So to use the example of Khadija radiallahu anha to suggest that a woman's primary responsibility is to do business, that would be incorrect. Of course, it's permissible for a woman to do business within the parameters of the Sharia. But ultimately, الرجال قوامون على النساء, whose primary responsibility is it to earn the livelihood for the family? It's the husbands. Of course, yes, dynamics, women have to supplement the income, women have to help. Very expensive living standards nowadays, that's a separate matter. So men need to be careful about allowing themselves to be emasculated, where you become what the hadith talks about, a youth, a cuckold, where your wife and your children flagrantly violate the commands of Allah. They dress immodestly, they interact immodestly, they break the commands of Allah, and no, it's their right. I can't enforce my views on them. I can't impose my laws on them. You are answerable to Allah. كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. On the other hand, when it comes to the mundane, the routine, the day-to-day, الرجال قوامون على النساء doesn't mean you like a tyrant in the house. So يغلبن كريما ويغلبهن لئيم. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that man who allows his wife to take a little bit of advantage of him, he is an honorable man. And that man who is so harsh that his wife doesn't have no latitude, he's a wretched man. And I want to be an honorable man. So when it comes to where you're going to eat out, or it comes where, what's the destination for the holiday? Are we going to go to Durban or are we going to go to Cape Town? When it comes to what color you're going to paint the kitchen, and your wife is spending 99% of her time in the kitchen, you've got to give latitude. So being the guardian means the responsibility stops with you. It doesn't mean that you can't be compassionate. So on the one hand, you don't shirk your responsibility, especially when it comes to the commands of Allah and when it comes to what you have to do for your family. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that when it comes to the matters of the house, no, you can only buy your potatoes here, you can't buy it there, you have to do this, I'm in charge. Actually, the ulama have written that when it comes to the household affairs, give the women the discretion, give them the latitude to make certain decisions. And even the major decisions, consult with them, with the wife, with the children when they're of age. But ultimately, one person makes the decision. So those are just some examples that we can further elaborate on as we progress in the discussion.
So essentially what you are saying, Mulana, that men and women, they supplement each other. It's a complementary relationship. We are equal in the court of Allah, but our roles are defined. And there's a primary role that a man needs to fulfill, and there's a primary role that a woman needs to fulfill. And each one needs to play their part for the harmony of the home. And when the roles are mixed up or challenged, and that's when we see chaos or we see struggles in the home. Is that what you're saying, Mulana?
Absolutely. And now to tie that down to the topic of masculinity, right? Because we live in an age now, like I say, perhaps at times it's not intentional, wanting to correct the abuse of men who abuse the power given to them by Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. There's an overcorrection and men are being emasculated. And at times it's very intentional for whatever purpose or objective. Now, people have become allergic to accepting that a man has a particular function of leadership, of responsibility, of strength, when you don't have to be allergic to that. If you look at the nature of a woman, right, even a modern woman, what does she want? She wants a strong man. She doesn't want a meek, weak man. There's a difference between a strong man, al-mu'min al-qawi, and an abusive man. So again, I'm reiterating because, people sometimes just go on a tangent. Oh, but men are abusing their wives and they sexually exploiting their wives and they battering their wives. Of course, that stands condemned. It goes without saying. We're not talking about that. We're talking about overcorrecting. And where society now wants to push equality to the point of insulting a woman. Because the more a woman becomes like a man, the more you acknowledge her. And the less that she becomes like her own unique creation, which she is, which Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has created her, the more you see her as backward and you see her as conservative and you see her as under the clutches of the men. So there are women today who will tell you that we find the leadership of a man, the strong man, a man being qawamun ala nisa, as grounding, as stabilizing, as reassuring. It gives us that solid feeling of security, of solace. Now, this is not in any way a criticism of women. Allah has created women with certain strengths and men with certain strengths. When you're scared as a baby, you run to your mother because she's more nurturing, right? The mother is more loving. The mother is more caring. But the father has to be more authoritarian. The quality of nurturing is overwhelming in a mother, right? So a child then, as the child gets on in age, is likely to take advantage of that. The balance will come now from the authoritative nature of the father. So if the father is emasculated and the mother is naturally more nurturing, soft, compassionate, what's going to happen to that child? You're playing with the balance of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Sons need a masculine role model. Otherwise, they grow up with a very weak sense of identity. They're uncertain of their role in society, their place in society. Daughters need a healthy relationship with a masculine individual, being their fathers, so that when they grow up, they don't then become desperate and provocatively seek male attention. Now, when society pushes this narrative, which is imbalanced and which is absurd, that in order to acknowledge a woman, you've got to emasculate a man, then you upset the balance, the marital dynamic suffers. So when you try to suppress that which is inherent in a man, eventually then it's going to boil over, or the person is going to just totally collapse and become a meek individual in society. And when you suppress it, it then has an impact on the children. And It happens in one generation, it then gets passed on from generation to generation. So we've got to understand that this is what we're seeing today, where men are being encouraged, be it via the media or movies or what is now considered to be woke or considered to be fashionable, that no, you must become weak and meek. You must become, everything has to be kind of half-half, equal rather than equitable. You're actually upsetting the balance. In the quest for gender equality, you're actually achieving gender absurdity. It's not good for women, it's not good for the men, and it's not good for children. And we're starting to see the effects of it. You're starting to see men, for example, who are taking this grooming to an extreme level. So, of course, we know that Allah says in the Quran, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, that women have similar rights over men, like men have rights over them. And Abdullah ibn Abbas used to say that I, will keep myself neat and tidy so that, like I want my wife to be, attractive and appealing to me. But beauty is more appreciated in a woman. That is a biological fact. Even the advertising industry acknowledges that, right? They want to sell anything, they put a woman next to it. That's not a license for a man to be dirty or to be untidy. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam carried his comb, he carried his miswak, he carried his itar, he did miswak of the teeth before he entered the home. That is all important. But now men going to the point where they're wearing more jewelry than the women folk wear, where they spend more time by the barber, doing threading and shaping of eyebrows. I'm not going into the masail of it. So now that is, in my opinion, a man trying to be more woman than a woman is actually supposed to be. And what is a woman doing? Rugged.
Yes.
Very rugged look, wanting to look almost like masculine in a man. So we're blurring the lines between what is unique for a man, masculinity in a positive sense, and what is unique for a woman, femininity in a positive sense. So at times there's a bit of an overlap. Men are coming a bit too much this side, women are coming a bit too much that side, and at times it's a total swap. It's a total swap, and that's not good for the balance of society.
Subhanallah. That's very important what you say there, Murana. So if I put it like this, what would be the benefits for a lady to live within the Islamic model where she subscribes to the fact that the husband is the leader of the house? What would be the perceived benefits for her?
Well, firstly, on a logical level, right? The being who designed us knows best how we should operate. You buy a product, you read the manual. You don't decide for yourself how to operate the product because you did not create that product. So Allah has created a system. And our fundamental belief as Muslims is Allah is just. Allah won't oppress men, Allah won't oppress women. So if Allah has said that this is the role of a woman and this is the role of a man, no matter what society says or what science says or what coaches or life coaches or psychologists or psychiatrists or whoever says, as Muslims, we talk about it from the Islamic paradigm, the law of Allah and the system of Allah is just. And when it's just, automatically it's balanced. So the greatest benefit of playing your part is that you keep up that balance. It doesn't mean you'll have a perfect marriage. It doesn't mean you'll have a perfect a parent-child relationship or a perfect house. But it means that the foundation will be solid because there's balance. You're not challenging each other. You're trying to complement each other. If there's any shortcoming, it will be a shortcoming in how you're complementing each other. Not that you're trying to be more like your husband and your husband is trying to be more like you. So that's the one benefit. The other thing is that you've got to see that sometimes certain words in Islam are used in a very positive sense, whereas in a secular environment it's used in a negative sense. So I give you one example. The word abd. In Arabic, in Islam, it's a very beautiful thing. It means you totally submit and enslave yourself to Allah. And only when you totally enslave yourself to Allah, that is when you are truly liberated from everything and everyone else. But when you say in English slave, now, it has a very negative connotation. You think you're somebody who's shackled in chains and being shipped off somewhere to be sold as a slave. So when we talk about words like obedience or submission, now automatically the alarm bells start ringing. This is very chauvinistic. Why must a woman be obedient to a husband? Why must a woman be submissive to a husband? So hold on, right? For us, what is sacrosanct? Qala Allah, qala Rasul. Whatever Allah said, whatever Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said. So we must calm our emotions. We must just put pause on our emotions. We must put pause on our intellect for a moment and say, what does the Quran say? الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامٌ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. Not a license for men to abuse, not a justification for those who are abusing, but the Quran says it, right? What does Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam say? The meaning of the hadith. that if I were to instruct anybody to prostrate before anybody, I would instruct a woman to prostrate before husband. Obviously, you don't prostrate, but the point Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was making, that you are not supposed to be insubordinate to your husband. Now, I'm very intentionally using this word because even in a secular society, if you are insubordinate to your boss, it's grounds for dismissal. It's grounds for dismissal or for warning or for a disciplinary hearing. So you can accept it in a working environment. You can't say in a working environment, why must I be obedient to my boss? Why must I be submissive to my boss? No, I'm equal. No, it's not about equality. It's about the functioning of a system. Now, submission doesn't mean that you must allow your boss to whoop you in the streets. Right? You have your rights. Obedience doesn't mean that if your boss tells you to jump off the sixth story of a building that you do it. It means that in terms of what is your boss's function and your function, you will be consulted, you'll be given an opportunity to give your viewpoint, but ultimately when a decision is made, you must show the discipline, falling in line. Same thing with the parent-child relationship. When they say be obedient to your parents, then we don't have a problem with that. We don't say, no, but you know what, I also have my rights. Of course, you have your rights, but ultimately your parent is going to make the final decision. Because Allah has equipped them to make that. Allah has given them that responsibility, right? That responsibility stops with them. So you will articulate your thoughts as a child, as a son or a daughter. The older you are, the more you'll articulate. But in the end, when the parent makes a decision, for the smooth functioning of the dynamic, you've got to comply. Now, if all the time the husband wants A, the wife says B. The husband says C, the wife says D. There's going to be absolute chaos. And the children will make hay. And they'll play the one against the other. And the house will become hell on earth. So that is the benefit. The benefit is that it will bring peace, security, contentment. Now, there may be some women who say, yeah, but I'm very obedient to my husband and he abuses me. That's a different matter. That's not the fault with the system. That's the fault with the individual. I come to work on time, I leave work on time, I work very hard, but my boss abuses me, then he's guilty of abuse. And that's going to be tackled with. But that doesn't mean that the remedy for that is for every staff member to rebel. The whole company will collapse. So with that very simple example, I think we should see the benefits that Allah has created a system. And this system is not at odds with the objectives of what the society today wants to achieve. Society doesn't want women to be abused. We're 100% for that. Society wants women to flourish. We're 100% for that. We're actually saying a woman will flourish when you allow her to play her natural role and when you allow the system to have its balance. Whereas look at the extent of rape, the extent of women abuse. It's more now than ever before.
Yes. So where did we go wrong, Murana? That's the question. And where did the shift take place? And more importantly, how did the shift take place? Because if we understand how did this mindset change and evolve, we'd be able to address the issue at hand, Murana.
So I think that every era has its unique challenges, right? So in the previous eras, there was a general trend of many men, not all men, but many men abusing their authority and abusing their wives and being too rigid with their wives. Now, there's an era where there's a quest to correct that, but many times it's being overcorrected in a manner which is not logical. Generally speaking, specifically for us for Muslims, and in a manner which at times is at odds with the fundamental principles of the Sharia. So that's where we went wrong, fundamentally. Beyond that, dynamics have also changed, right? So maybe in our grandparents' age, they lived a very different kind of lifestyle. So one man's income was adequate to take care of not only his wife and children, but also his elderly parents, and maybe he had a widowed sister or he had a divorced daughter. It was fine, right? Maybe a little bit samosa bhajiyas they made at home and sold to supplement. Today, dynamics are very different. Now, it's a different discussion as to whether it has more to do with necessities or luxuries or needs or wants. We don't want to go there. So what happens sometimes is people have good intentions. The husband is earning, the wife also has got a job now because she has to supplement the income. Okay, that's a reality. But you must not allow that reality to blur the lines to the point where the husband now starts to feel emasculated. And because what happens then, it's a reality, sometimes women earn more than men. Sometimes women are more qualified than men. Now you've got to manage that dynamic. Human beings have their sensitivities. They have their insecurities. Sometimes you're earning more or less an equal amount. So the wife feels now, you know what, I don't need to listen to you. I'm doing my half share. So now you must do your half share with everything else. And I think that's where we're not managing the dynamic very well. So for example, if a woman has to work to supplement her income, the income of the household, now she tells her husband, right, no, everything equal now. So one day I do dishes, you do dishes. One day I change the nappies, you do the nappies. No, of course the man must help. It's not beneath his dignity to help. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam helped, right? But what is the man's primary responsibility? What's a woman's primary responsibility? If there are exceptional circumstances, it's different. A man is very sickly. He can't work. He's got to be at home most of the time. Now his wife goes out and she works, and he does some of her responsibilities at home and look after the children and pick them up from school and drop off them up from school. Different matter. Or the man is already retired. He's earned his money, and for whatever reason the wife is still working, and now he does a bit more, understood. But to impose it, to say, no, now everything has to be the same. You must bring in half of the money, I'll bring in half of the money, you do half of the chores, I do half of the chores. Then you're making the relationship competitive, or you're making the relationship identical. You're not making the relationship complementary. You're now saying a man and woman are two parts of the same. And it's not like that. Allah has created us differently and given us unique strengths and unique abilities. So yes, we have to overlap from time to time and assist each other. The wife will assist with supplementing income. The husband will assist with chores. But we must never lose sight of what is primary responsibility, what is second responsibility. The other thing that has come up is that, you've got terms like, for example, toxic masculinity. So with Andrew Tate, becoming very famous, not everything that he says is wrong, but some of what he says, I'm talking from an Islamic perspective, goes beyond the parameters of what even Islam allows. So people say, that's toxic masculinity, just objectifying and commodifying a woman. Of course, that's wrong from an Islamic perspective. Toxic masculinity is when you're using your position of authority to abuse. Whereas healthy masculinity is you use your position to keep balance, to keep the family on the straight path, in compliance with the teachings of Allah. You find the balance between strength and compassion, between wisdom and humility, which we see in the example of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Then there's also another extreme, right, that men don't cry. So like a man can't show vulnerability, he can't show any emotion because it's assumed that goes contrary to masculinity. Is wrong. When Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came from the cave of Hira, he rushed into the arms of Khadija radiallahu anha, and he was shaking, and he was saying, Zammiluni, Dathiruni. He was showing vulnerability, and he was the epitome of strength, physical, emotional, spiritual, and otherwise. But he was a human as well. So there were moments of vulnerability. There were times when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam became emotional. There was times when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam became worried. And he went to his wife and said, at Hudaybiyah, the Sahaba, it doesn't seem that my message is hitting home. He showed his vulnerability, his concern. So men do cry. Men can cry. Men should cry. Men will be vulnerable. There are times when a man will need his wife to lift him up. There is a fair degree of truth when they say behind every successful man is a strong and a great woman. But we have to understand that what are the fundamental traits which are supposed to be prominent in a man, and what are the fundamental traits which are supposed to be prominent in a woman, and we must in the main remain true to those traits in either gender to keep the balance and harmony.
So, Maulana, the question then is that because there has been this generational shift and the paradigm has changed and the prism through which people see their roles have changed, how do you now bring back things to default setting? I mean, the man needs to learn leadership skills. He needs to learn how to be a leader. And on the other side, a woman needs to learn how to subscribe to this model of living. How do you bring back things to default settings? I mean, we find men that they are unable to exhibit leadership skills in the house. And then we find women that are continuously tussling with men and not trying to live within the Islamic model. So how do you bring back things to normality, Mullah?
I think education, right? So you've got all these terminologies. What's masculinity? What's chivalry? Sometimes people, there's a kind of convenient hypocrisy. When it's time for privileges of making decisions, then no, it's equal. When it comes to heavy lifting or certain tasks, no, the man must show chivalry. He must be willing to do it for a woman. So we've got to start unpacking these terminologies from a Quranic perspective. But for that to be effective, we've got to move out of this argumentative mindset and this emotional mindset. So sometimes what happens is like the typical marriage scenario. You talk about the rights of the husband. Women just look at the title and their emotions are already flaring. You talk about the rights of the wife and the men are already getting all worked up. So if a Maulana gives a bayan in the masjid, a talk about the rights of wives, the men, yeah, you see, you're going to make them sit on our heads. When you talk about the rights of the husband, yeah, men are for men. These Maulanas will always talk in favor of men. That is very petulant. That is very, very immature. We need to have these discussions. Maybe everything we said is not correct in terms of our understanding. Quran and Hadith will always be correct, but in terms of our understanding of the dynamics, fine. Let's have a discussion around it. That's why we have podcasts of this particular nature. So we've got to have an open mind and we've got to have a calm mind. Things have become very blurred because we live in an era of social media. You're getting bombarded with terminologies directly and messaging, imaging subliminally all the time. And that settles into your subconscious. And that has now created gray areas and that has created overlaps. And what is the secular meaning of certain things? What is the Islamic meaning of certain things? People are sometimes scared to speak because they feel, no, they will be accused of being patriarchal, or they'll be accused of being chauvinistic or anti-women, or they'll come under fire from feminists. We are all feminists. Every Muslim is a feminist in the pure definition of the term. As we would define it, right? But these things have their definitions, they have their contexts in Sharia. So we are Muslims first. Like I said, when you say La ilaha illallah, then you put everything aside for a moment and say, right, what does Quran say? What does Sunnah say? And how do I need to then adjust perhaps my own understanding, which may have become a little bit disaligned because of we are all socially conditioned by the environment that we live in, and we've got to come back to the balance of Islam for the goodness of all of us. So education, but education together with an open mind and constructive dialogue and discourse. Not that if we talk about women, the men must just get emotional, but, and what about? And when you're talking about women, then but, and what about? And generally in podcasts like this or discussions like this, when you see the comments come up, but why are you not talking about men who abuse their wives? And why are you not talking about men who give their wives 3 talaqs? Each discussion is important on its own. You can't have all of these discussions simultaneously. But trying to correct certain things doesn't mean you create other problems in the process. So today the topic is about masculinity, and that we as a society need to be careful that we don't emasculate our man, because it's not only bad for that man, that man himself, it's bad for his wife, it's bad for his children, it's bad for his family dynamic, and it's bad for society as a whole.
So in essence, you are saying that there are many people who define the role of men and women, many isms and ideologies in the world, but we should go by what the Quran and the Sunnah is saying, because that is the default inherent qualities and the nature which Allah speaks to. And there are certain traits that men brings to a relationship that are unique to him and that are natural to him. And there are certain traits that women bring to a relationship that's unique to her and natural to her. And when we work in harmony, in tandem with one another, where we utilize each other's strength and we work together for the greater cause of the relationship, we'll have better results. Mullah, the last thing before we end off today is that, we always require role models and examples to follow. Who do we follow in this regard? Whose role model do we take on as the ideal couple or the ideal relationship to emulate on our side, brother?
Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Azwaj Mutaharat. And you'll find a balance there. And when you look at it, you must look at it holistically. So like I gave the example before, don't only say that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did chores at home, but also look at how Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam expected his daughter to do the chores at home. Primary and secondary responsibilities. We must also make a distinction between culture and Islam. Not everything of culture is bad. A lot about culture is good. The fact that man packed the car, that's not necessarily a bad thing from an Islamic perspective. You pack the car and the woman makes the breakfast. Now there's the technical things about whether she's obligated or not, that's fake. But in terms of the relationship being complementary, that's part of culture, we may think, but it fits within the parameters of the Sharia. I once heard of an example of a woman who said, no, I make breakfast for myself. He must make his own breakfast. Everything is equal. Why must I make his breakfast? So that is where now you lose the plot. Now, if you look at Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's example holistically with the Azwaj Mutaharat, then you'll understand exactly what is the role of a man, what is the role of a woman, and how to find that balance.
The last thing, we always have people from outside talking into the relationship. You must never let her overrule you. You must never let her talk into what she wants to do. And then you get the others that say, no, you must show her who's the man. You must wear the pants in the house. Yeah? You don't let her take advantage of you. So how do you fix that problem?
Again, in the example of Mr. When it came to mundane things, human things, right? Oh, Aisha, I know when you're angry with me.
Yeah.
So that means, oh, Aisha, I don't have a problem if you get angry with me. But when it came to the command of Allah, no compromise. Right? So if your wife is not performing her salah, no compromise. Then you are responsible. Kullukum ra'in. When your wife is not dressed properly, your wife is interacting inappropriately, no compromise. But now, Aisha radiallahu anha spoke out of turn, didn't she? At times, she threw the container down with the food that came from from another wife's house, did Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam overreact or did he smile? Did he just tell the Sahaba that your mother is getting a bit jealous? So that's in that example of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you'll find what it means to be a guardian and to find that balance between compassion with the normal things. If you look and you see in our pious predecessors, they were very easygoing at home. They gave their families a lot of latitude when it came to the routine stuff. But when it came to the commands of Allah, when it came to the important things, then they drew the line. You don't be extravagant, you don't waste money. I know of certain pious people, if they walked into the house and they found the women folk gossiping about others, they would get exceptionally angry because there is a major sin. Now that doesn't bother us. But now if you want the couch like this and your wife wants a couch like that, now you make it an issue. Whereas in those things, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, "Yaghlibna kariman," let society say that this man's wife controls him. Fine, no problem. On what aspects does she control? That's the key thing.
Well, was a fascinating discussion indeed, and there are many other angles also to always explore, but I think this is sufficient enough to get us going on our side to talk about these matters more openly, to discuss it amongst ourselves as husband and wife, and more importantly, to bring in the Islamic perspective. Sometimes we use terms very loosely, very broadly, and in generalized circumstances like chauvinistic, patriarchal society, abuse of partner. We use it very loosely, but when you actually get to the core of the issue, you realize that it's not an abuse of men. He's not an abusive man, and I'm not in an abusive relationship, and this is not a patriarchal society, and this is not the setting. So be very cautious on how you take on these terms and how you use them and what connotations it holds for the relationship. May Allah bless us all. And remember, at the end of the day, we are told to make dua for one another. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين وجعلنا للمتقين إماما. And this is the only relationship that starts off in the dunya, and this is the only ibadah that starts off in the dunya, and it carries through to the akhirah. In the akhirah, you will still be together, husband and wife. So the system of Allah is not to put one against the other, and not to say one is better than the other, but the system of Allah is there for greater harmony of the relationship. And the more we subscribe to that, the greater joy we'll find in our relationship. May Allah bless us all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.